time to grade every AFL team that missed out on finals season. Give some quick thoughts on how I think they went, how I think they might go next year, what their off-season potential will look like, uh, maybe some standout players. And we'll kind of start off with Collingwood as they finished ninth and just work our way down to Richmond and give the thoughts. And don't forget to, in the comments as well, let me know your uh, grade for each team and how you think they went. If you're a fan of any of these teams as well, let me know and how you think it'll go, what your hopes are for the off-season moving forward as well, and how you think that might look. But yeah, as I said, we'll start off with Collingwood. To me, I gave them a C. I know they're the reigning premiers and they missed out on finals, which is obviously a big drop off. It just felt like it was one of those seasons where they struggled with injuries. Darcy Moore just had a real drop off in form, which will be disappointing for them. But it felt as though it was one of those seasons where you're just like, this just has to be an anomaly. Mate, there's got to be something else going on because he's a quality player. I think next year he'll bounce back. He'll be his best. I couldn't see him being worse or at that same level. I think he's too good of a player to not rebound. But yeah, it just felt like they struggled with injuries. I mean, they end up putting up some good fight. A bit of that magic come back late and win games kind of ran out a bit as well. So it felt like a bit of a perfect storm for them for things to go wrong a bit. But next year, I think they'll go back to being good. It'll be interesting to see how they go with some of the aging players like Steele Sidebottom, Jeremy Howe, Scott Pendlebury, all coming back. I think Pendlebury will be really good. He is a bit like a Chris Paul in the NBA for a bit of a comparison to me, where his game doesn't rely on his athleticism. He just is such a smart player that he'll always be really good and able to play as long as he wants to, injuries permitting. And so I think he'll be fine. Still Sidebottom and Jeremy Howe, I think, are the big ones where I would be a bit concerned if I was a Collingwood fan about potential drop-offs from them. I think they've got the most room kind of to maneuver. I think they both were fairly good this year, but I can see them really struggling next year, just age kind of catching up. So I think that'll be the barometer for their season. Nick Dacos and Josh Dacos as well had really good years as to be expected, and they probably will for the next decade and a half. Nick is a good chance to win the Brownlow. It'll be interesting to see how it comes out. I think Patrick Cripps is the current favourite, but Nick Dacos will definitely be up there and it'll be a shout. I wonder if it'll get a bit interesting at the Collingwood table if Nick does miss out and Josh ends up piling a few votes and almost takes it away from him. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out come Brownlow night. But I think Collingwood fans will be loving having them around. They're always players in off season. It feels like, I mean, they're such a big club that players are always looking to move there. So I expect them next year to have a big bounce back and perform really well. Fremantle, I gave them a grade of a D. They just threw away too many big games, and that's just what cost them finals in the end. It just felt like they were getting a lot of close games and then would just throw it away late, and that's just what cost them. Next year, I think they'll be competitive again, a bit more indicative of how they were in that period when they were in that kind of upper mid finals situation, that kind of 3rd to 6th. That I can see them being around there next year. They've got a good list. They'll potentially get Shea Bolton, who'll be a big pickup for them. So I think that'll be better. Caleb Strong had a big breakout year as well, and so you can just see him kicking on next year as well. They had 5, I think, all-Australian players, the most of any side, which is a bit ridiculous for me to have a team that missed out on finals have more players in the all-Australian squad than any other team. Just doesn't make sense. I don't get that. But there was enough good signs from Fremantle for them to be disappointed and upset just in the manner in which they missed finals, but to then know next year they'll be really competitive, know what they've got to work on and how they'll go there. So I gave them a grade of a D. The big highlight for them was Cable Strong's breakout. So moving to Essendon, who, same with Fremantle, I gave them the grade of a D. We found out that the Essendon edge that was spoken about is actually just a cliff that will free fall from 2nd to 10th or 2nd to 11th actually is where they finished up. And I mean, I personally was never convinced by Essendon. I think to me, they came across more as a team in good form at the start of the season rather than an actual good team. If that makes sense, they just felt, they had a lot of players kind of playing above their normal level, and eventually it kind of came back to earth and they struggled a bit more. Next year, who knows where they're going to finish up? I mean, it could be anywhere from 5th to 14th, to be honest. They're just one of those sides you have no idea what to expect. It makes it tough when you're in the directors or coaching staff and the head office to know potentially what to do in the offseason. I mean, I guess any top end quality they can try and bring in would be worthwhile. What will they do with Jake Stringer as well, who's routinely known to, in a contract year, pretty much kick 40 goals and then drops off the next couple? Will they bring him back? What will they do? That'll be interesting to see. But yeah, the fans will be disappointed just the way they just fell down after such a good start. Just not what they're after, and next year, no idea what to expect from them at all. And there's one of those teams that I don't even really know too much to talk about them because it just felt very Essendon, to be honest. They showed good signs and then fell off, and Dyson Heppell, the fact they didn't give him a proper send-off game in Melbourne is really disappointing. And I think one of the things I found that I really like or one of the things I really love about being a Lakers fan is that the Lakers are renowned for knowing how to treat their stars well. That's one of the things. And what that means is it often gets misconstrued as, say, LeBron runs the team. And it's not necessarily that that's the case. It's more so they understand that the stars have a lot of importance and that the reputation of the club and how they treat their stars is important, and it'll incentivize other players to come to the team and other big names to come too. And so when you look at an Essendon in the way that Dyson Heppell is one of their best ever players, was with them through the worst of times, came through that, then was captain of the club, to then not even give him a send-off. I get finals were on the line, but Dyson Heppell was never going to be the make or break. Him playing was never going to cost them finals. It was already a long shot before that. I think sometimes you need to look at the club as a whole and how you want to be perceived and the culture you want to have, and playing him should be in the right thing. But they didn't. He's moved on, and it'll be interesting to see how they go next season, because your guess is as good as mine as to how they'll finish up. St Kilda, I gave them a grade of C. I think they showed good signs late in the season. They started playing really well, got some big wins, rocketed up the table a bit. It was just a shame. It was kind of after the season was dead and buried, and so they were kind of just playing to ruin other people's final chances and fun. And it's tough when teams are in that situation. To me, it's tough to tell whether that's actually a real indication of how good the team is, or if it's kind of, well, nothing matters because our season's over, so we can play with a bit more freedom. But come the start of next year, it'll be a bit more like the start of the year. So they'll be wanting for the latter part of the season to be a bit more of an indication into how things will play out next season. But to me, it all hinges on the supposed St Kilda war chest and how that goes, and what players they can bring in, and how they spend that, because I think they need some real quality to come into that side if they're a chance to contend for finals next year. But not too much to say on St Kilda. The season was kind of over once they started playing well. I gave them a C grade. It was kind of just there and happened, to be honest. Gold Coast, I gave their season grade a D. It just, you can't lose basically every away game you make. And I know they ended up winning two games away. I think it was the Essendon game and the Richmond game. Richmond were the wooden spoon for starters, and the season was already over by the time they did that. So disappointing. Damien Hardwick knows that where they need to improve. You saw it in his press conferences a lot. So I think after another off season, I expect them to have a big jump next year. The Daniel Rioli's looking like he's going to go up to pair with Damien Hardwick and have a bit of a reunion there. There's always rumours Dusty's going to come out of retirement to play for Gold Coast next year, and who else might join the Suns as well, because Damien Hardwick definitely is a coach that has some pulling power given his history and what he's achieved in the game. And so I think next year they'll take a big leap. I think they at least have the voodoo of the away games off the back. They won a couple. They did lose a couple at home, which kind of then cancelled each other out and is why they missed finals. But I think they learned enough. It was a disappointing season, but I think next year's the season where it's okay, you kind of have to make finals for anyone to be taking you seriously. Now they've still not made finals as a football club since their inception, and it's been 12, 13 years now. What was it? 2012 they came in, so 12 going into 13 years that they since they were founded, and still yet to make a finals appearance. And so it's just next year needs to be the year they do that, or else you don't know when that's eventually going to come. But I think it'll be the off-season. They've got the most potential in the off-season, or some of the most potential in the off-season, to bring in some big players with Damien Hardwick's pulling power, as I mentioned. And so that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I'd love to be a fly on the wall to know how that off-season goes, because Damien Hardwick will know how to get the best out of them and what's required to turn a club around, as he proved with Richmond and took them from being terrible and not making any finals, and then eventually slowly build them up to the dynasty they became. And so I don't know, the Suns will get there, but if he can get them to a finals game and win a finals game, then I think the Suns fans will be happy to start with. So yeah, gave them a D grade. It was a disappointing season given their away form, but I think next year's the big test year for them. Melbourne, I gave them a F grade. Anything that could go wrong went wrong for Melbourne. They just, injuries, the Petrarca situation, Clayton Oliver coming in, Gawn just being wheeled out to the media repeatedly, the culture concerns as well with Goodwin and Petrarca having their issues. It just, and yeah, as I say, anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Their off-season looks as though they've got players just wanting to go everywhere. Like, Oliver looks as though he might leave, although I think apparently he might be going and holidaying with Max Gawn, so hopefully you can help him out a bit from a Melbourne's perspective, help him out a bit, get his head right heading into next season, because he is a quality player, and this year just was terrible. And I think a lot of that off-season drama last year leading into it, that played a big part. Petrarca, just, who knows what's going to happen there. I mean, he apparently just wants the club he just wasn't happy with the way he was treated by the club for his injuries. I mean, I was listening to reading some news and listening to a podcast talking about it today, and they mentioned that apparently Petrarca's wife actually got called into the hospital on the off chance he died from his injuries, and that is mental, especially when you consider, and like obviously, thankfully, didn't know, it would have been so tragic. But then you think the Crows cultural issues that I got Melbourne confused. For the Melbourne coaches to then send him back on and medical stuff, send him back on. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if my coach essentially tried to kill me, or my employer tried to kill me, and then I'd probably be like, yeah, I don't particularly want to work here. Shockingly. Don't know about you, but not really what I'm after in an employer. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see just how this all ends up, because he's such a good player. I don't know if anyone will be able to offer Melbourne what they'll be willing to accept. I mean, he's got such a long contract, so it's just wild situation altogether for such a club. Great for Melbourne. It was a big part in bringing them their first premiership since, what was it, the 50s? So, yeah, it's interesting how it'll all play out. Their off-season feels like it's the most up in the air. I mean, Richmond we'll get to, but they've just got a mass exodus and will just be starting their rebuild. And then there's a few teams who have a bit of a war chest and will look to spend a bit of money to bring some players in. But Melbourne just feels like, who knows the direction they'll go in. Will they try and make a big splash to keep Petrarca happy, or will he end up moving on? It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But yeah, their season was an F. Anything that could go wrong just did, and they'll be looking to move on next season. But the off season's where the true test comes for them, and what will happen for the club moving forward in their direction. Adelaide, D-. I said it previously, earlier in the podcast. It just poor performances that fell off a cliff once Rankin got injured against Collingwood. Ended the season by throwing one of our star players and star prospects under the bus and showing a clear lack of culture. So that's going to be hanging over the entire off season. It just disappointing. Still haven't made finals since 2017 when we made the grand final and threw that whole squad away for outright stupidity in destroying a culture. And so to be here 7 years later, still having questions over culture is disappointing as a fan. But keeping it brief for them, the off season, we need a big off season. I think Van Boolen declared the Crows as his preferred destination, so that's good. There's rumours we'll be looking at Lukosius as well from Gold Coast, who I think would also be really good for the Crows. So hopefully we're at least making some attempts to really improve the squad and get that top end quality, because that's what we need. And in the same way that for Gold Coast, they said next year's the make or break year as almost a club, I think next year's the make or break year for Matthew Nicks. The Crows need to be in the hunt. It needs to be a much improved season from this year. If it ends up being like last season when we were that one wrong call away from finals, I think it'll be disappointing to not make finals again, but at least there could be enough positive signs that we're in contention, and then the following year you need to make it. But yeah, next year's the make or break season for Matthew Nicks, I think. West Coast, I gave them a C. We expected them to be poor. They were poor. They had periods where they showed good signs throughout the season, a bit more fight, but then they ended up sacking Simpson. They're struggling to find a coach, which is the worrying sign. If you're a fan, the fact they just can't seem to find anyone, and everyone's just pulling out the race repeatedly. There's people you didn't even know were rumored to be wanting it, just pulling out of it, is a big concern. The article from a journalist in WA who suggested that Justin Langer take over the team it's hilarious, because why not get a cricket coach who failed as a cricket coach to then coach an AFL team? Why would you want that. I mean, I think that article also referenced because it worked in Ted Lasso. Yeah, do you know why it worked in Ted Lasso? Because it's a show, in my opinion, the best TV show of all time. But it's a show. They wrote it so it worked well. Yeah, no shit. Like that's you can't base fact off a TV show. But WA journalists, they've proven time and time again to be weird. That the article after Simpson left, the Chokers page about Fremantle leading into their final game when they could still make finals. It's just a bit backwards out there. But getting back to West Coast, yeah, struggling to find a coach. That's the big focus in the off season for them. I think they'll be losing Tom Barras as well. He's expected to go to Hawthorn. I think he requested a trade to. And so we'll see what they get back from them. But their rebuild kind of continues. Harley Reid showed really good signs he's going to be a top player. Wavered in the sort of second half of the season, which is to be expected from a young player. I mean, the step up to AFL level is enormous. And so you expect him to kind of fatigue, especially when you play for a WA team. You have to do so much travel. Like, if you're not used to it, it's going to tire you out. And so I think next year he'll be improved again and be able to sustain it a bit longer. But that's kind of what West Coast were hoping for this year. It's what they got. I think it's kind of a C. They weren't at the bottom, so that helps. North Melbourne, I gave them a D+ grade. I mean, they were expected to be poor, and they did end up being poor. So in the same vein as West Coast, it's just the fact they struggle so much without Harry Sheezel. Really is the dictating grade. When they don't have Harry Sheezel on the side, their average losing margin is 100 points. That's obscene for one player to make such a big difference, and that's the big concern for them. I think next year is the year they'll want to see the big improvement. I think that's a common theme throughout the finals, or the teams that miss finals, that next year there's a lot of teams that really are expected to make a big jump up, which will just, to me, next season is going to be even more competitive than this year. Because, I mean, we had basically at one stage it was like 1st to 14th could make it. I mean, next year you could kind of look at even getting into the last few games of the season. I can see it being really close in that kind of lower end of the 8 to that 14th, 15th range. I can see there being a lot of teams in that competition, in the competition for those places. And North will be, even if they're not in that competition, they'll want to show that there's a clear tier above. They're clearly above West Coast and Richmond, and there'll inevitably be some team that drops really far down. It might be a Melbourne if they have to hit the rebuild and Petrarca leaves. But I can see them really wanting to put themselves in tier above and show some growth. And because I've seen calls that maybe Clarkson's not the right man, but it feels very soon for that to be starting, because it's been basically a year. Because I know last season was a bit tumultuous in what was going on, and so yeah, I think it just disappointing season. It's the inability to perform without Harry Sheezel is the big concern, and big reason why they got this grade to me, in being a bit lower than West Coast, is what they want to see. I mean, Sherry had a big season. I think next year they'll want to see that really kick on. They've got enough signs that there can be improvement for them next year. And so North fans, I think, are more optimistic now than they have been in a lot of previous years. And fair enough. I think they've got enough signs to indicate they should be. Richmond, the final team, I gave them an F. They're going to have a mass exodus of players. They got the wooden spoon. That now's the start of their rebuild. Basically, Dusty's left, like that core of the dynasty has pretty much moved on now, and they'll be just starting that rebuild and seeing what they can get back for Bolton and Rioli. You got to feel for a place like Toronto who moved there thinking they were moving to a dynasty and then kind of have found themselves in this exodus. Will they look to leave? Yeah, it's rough for them. They'll be just, it's the start of their rebuild, like I said, and so it's going to be a tough few years. Richmond fans are no strangers to that. I mean, it was only a decade or so they were kind of in this position and were able to build themselves out of it, so they'll be optimistic it's possible. But now they'll just look back and be watching those highlight films from 2017 and their premierships that followed after that as well. So it's pretty simple for them. They're going to have a mass exodus. They got the wooden spoon. It's an F grade. It's going to be a tough few years, I think, for Richmond going forward. But that's my grades for the teams that missed out on the finals in the AFL. Let me know the grades you'd give for the teams below. And as I said before, if you're a fan of a team, let me know how you think you went, what you'd give it as a grade, what you're looking forward to next season, or what you think your team might do in the off season. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts around that. Thank you for listening. This is actually a clip from my full podcast, the Armchair Athlete podcast. If you haven't listened to it in full, be sure to go check it out. I'll link the video on the screen as well, and check out any of the other clips as well. They'll be floating around. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, or like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below any of your thoughts on this as well. More engagement, the better, as I continue to try and grow the channel and boost the audiences and yeah, trying to just keep getting better ultimately. So let me know in the comments below if you've got any suggestions or topics as well you want to discuss. But I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.